Good morning from Hawthorne, California. It is October 9th, just after 5:21 a.m. Pacific Time. Welcome to the webcast of the Falcon 9 mission, carrying the third flight of 10 Iridium Next satellites. You're seeing a live view of Falcon 9 as we prepare for launch in just about 15 minutes from now. Launch is currently scheduled for 12 hours, 37 minutes, and 1 second Universal Time, or 5 hours, 37 minutes, 01 seconds a.m. Pacific Daylight Savings Time. I'm John Isbrucker, Falcon 9 Principal Integration Engineer, and I'll be bringing you coverage of the SpaceX launch for the Iridium Next satellites during the webcast. Now, this is our third of 8 planned launches for Iridium. Our first launch was January of this year, followed with a second one on June 25th. Today's mission represents our 15th Falcon 9 launch of the year. Today's launch is from historic Space Launch Complex 4 at Vandenberg Air Force Base, our West Coast launch site. You can see illuminated in the pre-dawn darkness the two-stage Falcon 9 vehicle. It stands 70 meters tall. That's taller than a 20-story building. Now, the first stage of the Falcon 9 will provide the initial force to get out of the majority of the Earth's atmosphere. Today's flight will feature stage separation at about 66 kilometers altitude. If you look closely, you can see the first stage is the part of the vehicle that has the SpaceX logo on it. The first stage today will be returning to our drone ship named Just Read the Instructions. It'll take 3 burns of the first stage to get back to the drone ship, which will be located about 300 kilometers downrange of the launch pad in the Pacific Ocean. On top of the first stage is the second stage. That'll take the satellites from the edge of space and accelerate them to orbital speeds of just over 7.5 kilometers per second, 10 times faster than a bullet. Finally, on top of the vehicle is the 17-foot diameter payload fairing, inside of which are the 10 Iridium Next satellites. Now, you can see structure next to the Falcon 9. That's our transporter erector. There's 2 major parts of a transporter erector. First is the launch mount, the platform at the bottom that the rocket sets upon, and it provides connections into the first stage. On the side of the Falcon 9, you can see the strongback. That's the vertical tower. It provides connections to the second stage and the spacecraft. Now, these connections are umbilicals that carry power, propellant, gases, electrical commands, and vehicle telemetry. Finally, one reminder about the transport erector. It will recline before launch to a position of 77.5 degrees. That's different than our 39A launches on the East Coast, where the erector reclines after Falcon 9 lifts off. We're at T-minus 11.5 minutes, continuing to count down, looking for an on-time launch this morning. Everything on the Falcon 9 continues to look good right now. The Falcon 9 team working no significant issues or problems. We rolled out on the evening of the 7th. We went vertical. Checkouts have done well, and we are currently in the middle of the propellant loading sequence. We began loading fuel at T-minus 70 minutes. Fuel is now loaded on the second stage, and we are complete with fuel loading on the first stage, except for a small amount of topping off that we'll do in the last 7 minutes or so of the countdown. The major activity going on right now is liquid oxygen loading. That's in progress on both the first and the second stages, and that'll continue down to the last 3 to 2 minutes of the countdown. Our next major activities that we're going to see are the opening is the retraction of the strongback. Then inside of 1 minute, we'll be opening starting the flight computer, counting us down for igniting the Merlin engines right before T0, and then release at T0. You may notice in a close-up the white grid fins. These are the aluminum grid fins. We're using those today instead of the dark titanium because this is a return from a trajectory that is less extreme than a geostationary transfer launch, and that allows us to use the aluminum grid fins. On the spacecraft side, the Iridium team has gone to internal power. They're working, no issues. Everything's looking good for the 10 satellites. For the range, we're operating out of Vandenberg. The Western Range is providing us similar support, airspace clearance, sea clearance, as we use for the Eastern Range launches. And finally this morning, the weather looks excellent. It's calm at ground level. Upper altitude winds a little bit high, but they're also within acceptable limits. So everything's looking good. Falcon 9, the Iridium satellites, the range, and the weather for an on-time launch in just over 9.5 minutes from now. T-minus 9 minutes, 15 seconds and counting. Everything looks good right now at Vandenberg at Slick 4. Today, SpaceX is launching 10 Iridium Next satellites to low Earth orbit. This is our third of 8 planned launches for our customer. Now, in order to correctly position the satellites, the SpaceX team has to launch right on time. So that means this morning our launch window is 1 second long. We do have a backup opportunity tomorrow if we had to scrub today. The Falcon 9 spacecraft, or second stage, will actually send the commands once we get into the proper orbit of 625 kilometers altitude. Those commands will individually release the Iridium satellites one at a time. Every 100 seconds we should get a satellite release, and that whole sequence will take 15 minutes, and we're going to try to bring it to you later on in the webcast. From there, the satellites will maneuver to their final orbit slightly higher from where we drop them off. Here's Matt Desch of Iridium with more on the Iridium system.
This is Matt Desch again. I feel like I'm a regular contributor to the SpaceX program because this is our third launch, 3rd out of 8, which is crazy. It's unprecedented, and I really appreciate all of those who've been following SpaceX launches and have been following us and have been rooting us along. It's working. Thank you, and keep it up. But those of you who are watching your first Iridium launch, let me tell you a little bit about what Iridium does. Iridium is a communications supplier. In fact, we're the world's furthest reaching, most global communication provider in the world. We provide service to every part of the planet through 66 satellites going around the Earth, all in low Earth orbit, about 780 kilometers above us, all interconnected in space, providing a mesh network of communication that covers every part of the planet, no matter where an asset that needs to be tracked needs to be. Just to give you an example how our satellites operate. So whether you're on a ship in the ocean or in an airplane, say going over the North Pole, or you're on Mount Everest with a satellite phone, when you turn it on, it makes a connection to whatever satellite happens to be overhead, and there's a new one every 8 to 10 minutes. So particularly for those in harm's way or hunkered down in a warm spot in a very cold place, they don't have to go to the top of the mountain to point towards a satellite someplace in space. Our satellites will come to our customers and provide them that connection. Because of the way we operate, we're really a specialty service. We provide a unique safety capability that works when no other communication device works. We're used in hurricane recoveries, we're used in earthquakes, we're making connections to first responders and protecting safety of life during emergencies. It's the most important things really go across our network. That's where Iridium performs best, and that's what we're really best at. Today, almost half of the devices on our network, almost 500,000 devices, are really connections to things. And in fact, you don't even know that Iridium is on your bus or on your ship or on your airplane, making a connection, sending information about the engine or the performance or the altitude or speed or the temperature or the humidity. It's sort of behind the scenes, and yet so important to really make machinery and equipment and things run. Our satellites can quickly, efficiently send data back and forth about anything, really, whether it's a piece of heavy equipment or in the oceans where there is no connections. You have buoys, things that protect us from tsunamis, that can provide early warning, making a connection to a refrigerated container as it travels across the ocean to ensure the cheese and the wine that are within those are stored at the proper temperature and they never broke down, and were put onto trucks, service vehicles, railway cars. Militaries put us onto MRAPs and tanks and trucks so that no matter where they put them, they know where they'll find them. Under manhole covers, there are systems that relay information about the height of the water in a sewer pipe to ensure that there's not overflows. We're used in remote cameras to send pictures back of important things like animals, or to protect trees, or to have other security. We're used on Border Patrol for monitoring remote locations and allow people to call and to track and to have sensors that can tell whether something moved across a certain area. You can't depend that there's always going to be a cell tower in those places. These new satellites are going to make that business run even more efficiently. It's exciting to see these things you've worked so long get into orbit and get into operation. Especially, we're excited because the first 20 have been working so well. I really want to get the remaining 55 satellites into orbit as quick as I can. So Launch 3, don't get tired of me. I'm going to be back over and over again almost every 2 months until we complete this amazing network and see it all in space.
T-minus 3 minutes and 38 seconds and counting down. Since we last talked with you, the strongback has begun reclining away from the Falcon 9 at Slick Fort, Vandenberg. Next major activities we're going to get into, about 3 minutes before launch, we'll begin securing liquid oxygen loading on the first stage. 2 minutes to go before launch, the second stage will complete. At T-minus 1 minute, the flight computers will go into startup and they'll take over the sequence leading to liftoff on the Falcon 9. A couple of words of warning. We've been loading helium into the second stage. The final go, no-go call for that would come just about 1 minute before launch, so we'll be listening in case we have not got enough helium on board. Another warning, at about T-minus 90 seconds, we begin venting the gaseous oxygen out of the ground side of that strongback. You might see a large white cloud coming off of the strongback. That's normal, nothing to be worried about. The Iridium satellites are ready to go. The range is ready to support. We've been looking at cruise ship, but they're not an issue this morning, and the weather looks good. We've heard stage 1 locks closeout complete. We're coming up on the 2 minute mark, so let's listen in to the terminal countdown of Falcon 9 with Iridium Mission 3.
ROC, this is RC on countdown 1. Can you confirm that the range is green?
Rockin' work.
Falcon 9 is on internal power. Stage 2 lock secured.
Rock range is green.
Vehicles in self-align. Stage 1, Stage 2 crashing secured.
AFTS is ready for launch.
Falcon 9's in startup. Stage 2, the startup pressures.
LD go for launch.
30. 20.
Stage 1 is at liftoff pressures.
15.
Falcon 9 is configured for flight.
10. 9. 8. 7. 6. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. Liftoff. Falcon 9. GC post launch pad operations to secure the pad on pad editing.
GC copies. Wilco.
T plus 1 minute and 17 seconds into flight, Falcon 9 approaching max Q. You've heard the call out, MVAC-D chilling. We're now getting the second stage engine ready for ignition. Several activities coming up here very shortly. At T plus 2 minutes and 24 seconds, we expect main engine cutoff, followed immediately by stage separation and ignition of the upper stage engine. Right after that, the first stage will begin the first of 3 burns to return us back to the Pacific Ocean to the drone ship parked offshore about 300 kilometers downrange. Coming up on MECO.
We have MECO. We have that back ignition.
T plus 2 minutes and 47 seconds into flight. We've had successful stage separation and ignition of the upper stage engine. And as you can see, we've also relit 3 of the engines on the first stage to begin the sequence that will return it to the drone ship in the Pacific Ocean. Boost back burn lasts about 30 seconds. And we have fairing separation. Had a brief view of the Iridium satellites as the fairing separated. Again, it's just before dawn as we head south over the Pacific Ocean, so we're not getting any sunlight. First stage boost back burn did complete. Fairing did successfully separate. We're waiting to hear the drone ship AOS, that's acquisition of signal. That indicates the drone ship is receiving telemetry from the first stage. Second stage propulsion continues to look nominal, coming up at T plus 4 minutes into flight. T plus 5 minutes into the flight of Falcon 9 carrying 10 Iridium Next satellites. Next event in our timeline is in about 35 seconds. That'll be a second ignition of the Falcon 9 first stage, what we call the entry burn. This is a burn of 3 Merlin 1D engines that'll slow us down for the actual re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. The burn itself will last about 13 seconds. Meanwhile, second stage, performance continues to look good, the trajectory is good, engine parameters look good.
Stage 1 entry startup.
And you see the flare on the screen. We have startup. It looks like all 3 engines are up and running. Also, you can see silhouetted the grid fins did deploy earlier. They'll now be used to guide us as we enter the Earth's atmosphere. And we've had shutdown of the entry burn.
Stage 1 AFTS has saved.
The automated flight termination system, autonomous flight termination system has saved on the first stage. We're coming up on T plus 7 minutes. Stage 1 is headed back to the drone ship in the Pacific Ocean. Stage 2 still headed to its initial parking orbit. Shutdown of the second stage engine should be just over T plus 9 minutes into flight.
AOS.
Now we're getting ready for the landing burn of the first stage.
Landing burn start. Stage 1 landing successful.
Delta LOS.
7.5 minutes into flight. You can hear from the applause. We lost the signal briefly, then it returned with the view of the first stage in that pre-dawn darkness, sitting on top of Just Read the Instructions. Out in the Pacific Ocean, a successful landing of the first stage. Meanwhile, the primary mission continuing, the second stage, 7 minutes and 54 seconds into flight, a little more than a minute left to go. Propulsion continues to look good on the second stage engine as we power to the low Earth parking orbit carrying the 10 Iridium Next satellites.
Elciane. Zooming in on this fire here.
Stage 2 AFTS has saved.
T plus 8 minutes and 38 seconds into flight. We've heard the autonomous flight termination system has been saved on the second stage call. Second stage just about to go into Earth orbit.
Yes, Eco.
Call out of SECO. Second stage engine cutoff. We're waiting right now for a call out from guidance, nav, and control. They're looking at the orbit of the second stage. Right now it looks at the telemetry we're getting. It looks like we've got a good orbit. This is the parking orbit of the second stage. This is the first of 2 orbits we're headed to today. Looks like we've got a good one here. What's going to happen now is we're entering a coast phase. You might have heard coast phase entry call out just a moment ago. We're going to coast about halfway around the Earth, passing over the Antarctica Peninsula, come up over Africa. We'll relight the second stage engine very briefly, That'll get us into the final orbit from which we'll deploy the 10 Iridium Next satellites. All of that's going to happen at about T plus 52 minutes. So right now, we're just past T plus 10 minutes into flight. We've had a good first stage landing after a great countdown and a liftoff. Second stage performance looked very good getting into low Earth orbit. And so we're now going to go through about a 41-minute coast period. So we're going to leave you an animation showing where the second stage of the Falcon 9 is as we're passing over various features on the Earth. We will resume live coverage of the upper stage mission and the separation of the Iridium Next satellites at T plus 51 minutes after the launch. So about 41 minutes from now, we'll come back, show you the second stage, second burn, and then we'll look for the 10 Iridium Next satellites and their separation. So with that, hang in there with us. We'll be back at T plus 51. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Mission 3 for our Iridium next satellite deployments. We're just past T plus 51 minutes since liftoff. We're coming up in less than a minute on reignition of the upper stage engine. This is a short burn of the MVAC-D engine lasting just about 4 seconds. That'll raise us to the circular altitude of 625 kilometers. Currently, on the view from space, we're using cold gas thrusters to help keep propellant settled at the bottom of the tank so that it's right on top of the turbopump when we spin it for ignition of the engine. So we're gonna wait right now for ignition of the engine, and then we'll come back following that with a view on how the orbit looks. We've got ignition and we have shutdown of the MVAC-D engine. As I mentioned, it's a very short burn. It does not take much to add a lot of energy to the orbit with the thrust of the second stage engine. What we're waiting to hear right now is what the orbit looks like. And we've heard the call out. Guidance, Navigation, and Control has announced a nominal orbit insertion. So we're through the second burn of the upper stage engine. As you can see on the screen right now, a little bit of what you're looking at, that is oxygen, icy oxygen. There's a nice view of the Iridium satellites. We're going to go through a period of about 5 minutes as we get the second stage pointed in the right direction, make sure all the attitude and rates are correct before we begin the 15-minute sequence of deploying Iridium satellites. Now that's going to occur over several ground stations. We're currently, as you can see from the orbit map, we're to the east of the southern tip of the African continent. We will cross over several ground stations. We'll try to bring you as many of the satellite deployments as we can. There may be delays during that period for confirming separation, so we'll bring it to you once we know what the data shows us. But for now, we're in a good orbit. We're lining up for deployment of Iridium, and we're going to come back with live coverage in just a few minutes as we begin the sequence of deploying the 10 Iridium Next satellites. T plus 56 minutes, 4 seconds since a great liftoff of Falcon 9. The Falcon 9 second stage is in the desired orbit. The 10 Iridium next satellites are mounted on a dispenser on top of the second stage, and we're coming up on the deployment sequence. Over the next 15 minutes, we will separate 10 Iridium next satellites into the desired orbit. From this orbit, they will eventually raise themselves to their final orbit where they'll integrate into the constellation. So we expect in about half a minute, we should get deployment of the first satellite. The view of the satellites you see here, there are 10 satellites. They are in 2 stacks of 5. So we'll see some of the satellites deploy, others we won't. They're on the back side of the dispenser. They're not in view of the camera. So right now we're just counting down, waiting for the flight computer to transition to the deployment state to release the first Iridium next satellite.
First spacecraft deploy confirmed.
And we have confirmation. First spacecraft deployment is confirmed. I think we could see a little bit of motion there. That one was coming from the top of the stack, so it's kind of hard to see with the other satellites underneath it. Now, as a reminder, every 100 seconds we go through a sequence where we will deploy another satellite. So the first one went about 57 minutes and 10 seconds into flight. The next one ought to come up at T plus 58:49. So about 1 minute from now, we'll hopefully get a second view from space. Satellite 2 deployment also may be in view of the camera. As I reminded you earlier, we are transitioning between several ground stations to cover this time period, so we may not have continuous live coverage all the way through the sequence. But once we do reestablish contact, if we were to lose it, we'll let you know how things are going in space.
Second spacecraft deploy confirmed.
We have confirmation. Spacecraft number 2 has deployed. You can see it just moving off at the very top of the screen before the camera cut back. That's a view of the upper stage engine. For those who are wondering, that white lump that you see on the edge of the nozzle, that is solid oxygen. So if you can imagine the oxygen you breathe, not only is it cold enough to turn liquid, it's cold enough now in space to actually turn to liquid oxygen or solid oxygen. It's an oxygen ice. That's of no issue to the vehicle. You may see those chunks dislodge from time to time. They're very light and easily broken apart. We're about half a minute away from spacecraft number 3 being deployed. This deployment will not be in view. It's on the backside of the dispenser, so we should not expect to see anything drifting through the field of view.
Third spacecraft deploy confirmed.
Avionics confirms deployment of the 3rd satellite. So that's 3 out of 10. Do the math, 7 to go.
Expected other one.
Right now, another 100 seconds. We'll just go through it like clockwork. The second stage flight computer sending commands on 100-second intervals. We're working the first 5 satellites that are at the top of the stack. As I mentioned, there are 2 layers of Iridium next satellites, 5 on top, 5 below. The ones you can see best are the 5 that are on the bottom stack, closest to the camera on the payload attached fitting. The ones we're deploying right now are coming off of the top of the stack. 3 of them are complete, 2 of them to go. Like y'all, we're waiting for avionics team to give us a call out that we have each of the 10 planned separations of the Iridium next satellites. Now, as a reminder, as we go through this 15-minute sequence, you can see on the animation, we are working our way up the East Africa coastline. We now have acquisition of signal in Dubai. So we're trying to cover the gap during this 15-minute period so that we've got continuous telemetry. We did drop out a little bit right after satellite 3, but fortunately we did get the confirmation before we dropped out that satellite had deployed. Coming up on deployment 4,
Fourth spacecraft deployed.
and there you get a great view of the 4th satellite deploying, just top dead center of the stack, in nice view of the payload attached fitting camera. Now, of course, with the cameras on the 2nd stage, we bounce between engineering views. Many of the propulsion team, for example, need to take a look at the 2nd stage engine so they can assess its performance even when it's not running in the vacuum of space. And then we also bounce and look at the forward-looking camera to pick up the Iridium next satellite deployments. The upcoming deployment will be the 5th satellite. That'll be the last of the 5 at the very top of the stack. Then we'll start working on the next 5 that are on the bottom half of the dispenser that remains permanently attached to the Falcon 9. We're about 40 seconds away from that next deployment. And as a reminder, for the deployment that's coming up, this one is not expected to be in the field of view of the camera.
Fifth spacecraft deploy confirmed.
Avionics Engineering confirms successful deployment of the 5th of the 10 Iridium Next satellites. Sequence continues to be clocked out by the flight computer mounted on top of the 2nd stage, sending signals to the controller up on the payload attached fitting that then routes the separation signals to each of the 10 Iridium Next satellites. So 5 down, 5 to go. Everything continues to look good at T plus 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 23 seconds.
Sixth spacecraft deploy confirmed.
And you had a great view. Now we're working on the lower half of the dispenser. The 6th satellite deployed. We could see it drifting away. A nice nominal release, not tipping it off, just moving it straight away from the dispenser. A great view from the payload attached fitting camera. Same time also on the daylight side of the Earth, We're getting some great views of the spacecraft and the Earth in the background. We're about 10 seconds away from the next planned deployment, the 7th satellite.
Seven spacecraft deployed confirmed.
And it took a minute, but we've got confirmation. It appears we're getting some dropouts in telemetry. So the call was a little bit late, but number 7 is on its way. That takes us to about a minute from now for release of satellite number 8. Now, if we continue to get video coverage as we see right now, satellite, the 8th one that will be deployed, is on the backside. You cannot see it in that view, so I don't think we're going to be able to see separation. Coming up in about 5 seconds for the next deployment.
Eighth spacecraft deployed confirmed.
Again, you saw by our graphic the Falcon 9 symbol superimposed. We lost data, it looked like, for a few seconds from the second stage. Then we got it back over the next ground station, and we have confirmed the 8th satellite has deployed on time. 2 satellites to go. Coming up will be the 9th satellite to be deployed out of the 10. You may notice this one will be in view. If you saw earlier stenciled on the payload attach fitting, this is satellite. It's got number 10 on it, but it's the 9th one to be deployed. This is nominal. That's a result of how we number positions on the dispenser, not actual numbers of the Iridium satellites. Nice view of the 9th satellite awaiting deployment from the Falcon 9 second stage.
Ninth spacecraft deployed.
Beautiful view of deployment of the 9th of 10 Iridium Next satellites. Gorgeous shot. You might have seen also some bright dots in the background. I believe those are some of the other Iridium satellites that were deployed just in the last several minutes. So essentially a long string of beads as we're moving away from the Falcon 9 second stage. So now we're down to 1 to go. We're 9 for 9. We're going for the 10th deployment. That'll come up at T plus 1 hour, 12 minutes, and 11 seconds, give or take a second. Now this satellite is not in view. It's on the back side of the dispenser, so we'll just have to watch it on telemetry. Great view showing the most recent Iridium satellite, as well as a couple of others in the background.
Final spacecraft deploy confirmed.
T plus 1 hour, 12 minutes, 17 seconds. Since a great liftoff, the 10th and final Iridium Next satellite has deployed right on time. So we're 10 for 10. Again, a clean sweep of Iridium Next satellite deployments in the desired final orbit. It's been a great morning. Countdown on time. We hit the instantaneous launch window of 1 second. First stage successfully landed on our drone ship in the Pacific Ocean. Second stage got into both the low Earth parking orbit, then relit its engine halfway around the world, got into the desired final orbit, and if you stayed with us for the past 15 minutes, you saw the great series of deploying 10 Iridium Next satellites. So that's going to bring an end to our webcast. There is, I'd like to say, a very nominal webcast for us. We'd like to thank our Iridium Next customer, the Air Force, for range support, and our government licensing agency, the Federal Aviation Administration. Also invite you to follow us on social media, on our Twitter feed, as well as on Instagram, and of course on our internet webpage at SpaceX.com. We'd like to thank you for letting us share the 14th flight of Falcon 9 with you. We look forward in a couple of days to the 15th flight, and until that webcast, we're signing off, saying thank you and goodbye.